It's a Monday, and that means it's a Trevor Matich Monday. ESPN college football insider, BYU national champion, joining us at the beginning of the week. Trevor, the question now is for BYU. What happens next?
Well, next, they have a short week, a bunch of new players that have to get ready to contribute at key positions on both sides of the ball, and they have to go play at a UCF team that, even though they have lost some games this year, they returned most of the squad that last year won a BCS Bowl. They beat Baylor in the Fiesta Bowl. And so this is a tough way to have to follow up a tough loss and a tough injury situation.
Taysom Hill out for the year. What do you think this means for BYU going forward mentally?
Well, mentally, what I think it'll mean is that they'll rally. I don't see BYU as a mentally fragile team. I see them as a bunch of tough guys. And what tough guys tend to do when you lose your leader is say, oh, no, the leader's no longer here. Taysom is no longer here to bail us out, to make the play. We have to step up ourselves to help Christian Stewart. And so I expect in a lot of ways BYU to get better. Now, at the quarterback position, you don't get better by losing Taysom. But I think at all the other positions, guys will step it up because mentally now you no longer have that crutch to know that you have one of the best players in the country to handle the load for you.
How do they get better without Taysom Hill?
Efficiency. When you talk about just the offense now, Christian Stewart is a senior. He's been around a long time, and he's actually a better pure passer than Taysom is. He's mobile enough, but he's not a running threat like Taysom. But the thing is, this BYU offense has tremendous skill players. The receiver position has been upgraded, and they provide matchup problems for teams in ways that they just haven't before. You've got big, tall guys like Mitch Matthews and Jordan Leslie. You've got fast guys like Devon Blackman. You can put all kinds of different matchup threats all over the field. And I think what you'll see now is instead of having a playmaker at quarterback, you'll have a distributor at quarterback. And Christian Stewart understands that the worst thing he can do is try to replace Taysom. The best thing he can do now is make the stars of this team those receivers, and then Jamaal Williams at running back. That's what they need to do. And so I think that's the difference you'll see. Instead of a quarterback that holds the ball, buys time, makes plays, you'll see a quarterback that treats the ball like it's on fire, and he's got to get it out of his hands so he doesn't get burned. And actually, that will be a good thing for BYU's offense.
And a lot of people, looked at Christian Stewart's performance, said, well, I'm not so sure. I want to see Christian Stewart on an even playing field where he's not down 14 and asked to make a lot of plays. And the guy that BYU, I think, will lean on is Jamaal Williams, averaging 19 carries per game through the 4 games he's played this season. How many more carries do you think Jamaal gets a game now that Taysom Hill's gone?
I don't think he needs to get more than 19 or 20. I think he could. That's fine. He's a big, strong workhorse of a back. But I think really short passes equal a run in a lot of ways. And I think what teams will tend to do is expect that Jamaal Williams will now have to be the guy. And they'll try to stop him first and force the ball into Christian Stewart's hand. That's what I would do. I would make the backup quarterback beat me.
Yes.
Well, if that's the case, what you don't want to do is run into the teeth of the defense all the time. You need to keep them honest. But what you want to do then is take what's given you. And this is where I think Stewart, with a week of practice like you talked about, being the number one guy, getting starters reps and things like that, will be in a position to be able to pick up the efficiency very, very quickly. Now, yes, teams stacked the box against Taysom Hill. But in Taysom Hill, you had a Heisman-caliber quarterback as a running quarterback and a good passer as well. So I think now it's time to take the passing lanes that you're given that you've got a quarterback and receivers that should have an opportunity to be able to make plays.
Let me follow it up with this. Taysom Hill is averaging 17 rushes per game. Where do those touches go now, in your opinion?
Well, they'll go to Jamaal Williams. They'll go to Adam Ene. They'll go to different folks. They'll throw the ball to the running backs more. But when it comes down to balance, people tend to look at stats like, well, gee, when they run the ball 25 times or more, they've won 18 of their last 20 games. Or that's a hypothetical, but things like that. But it's not that simple, because very often what you're doing is making decisions as to whether to run or throw based on what the defense presents you. Sometimes you'll throw the ball most of the time. Sometimes you'll run it most of the time. And BYU is not good enough to line up and overpower a team with their offensive line and Jamaal Williams when they stack the box. They're just not good enough to do that. With Taysom Hill in there, that's a different story. But without Taysom, they're not good enough. And I think it would be a mistake for them to try. So if the defense stacks the box, throw the ball. If that means you throw it 50 times, throw it. If the defense backs off to cover the pass, run the ball if that means you run it 50 times. So, and that's one thing that Robert Anae, the offensive coordinator, has shown a great talent for doing, is matching his scheme and his play calling to two things. One is the players that he has available in their skill set, and the other, what the defense is presenting. And so I think you'll see a lot of take what they give rather than impose our will.
ESPN college football analyst, 11-year NFL veteran Trevor Matich on BYU Sports Nation. Look, I know that Taysom Hill was the catalyst of the BYU offense. Everybody is talking about, well, now what do they do? I personally don't think the offense is the biggest issue for BYU moving forward. I look at what BYU's defense has done the past 2 games, and there are some serious concerns there. The lack of a pass rush, only 1 sack in the last 3 games. Trevor, what is the biggest concern in your mind for BYU's football team moving forward?
Well, you're exactly right. They're not able to defend the pass. And the question is it the lack of pass rush that's causing the secondary to get torched? Or is the secondary getting torched, not giving the pass rushers time to get there? I think there's a little bit of both, but I blame mostly the pass rush. You know, I tweeted out early in this game that a point of emphasis for BYU was to get more pressure on the quarterback with just 4 rushing without having to blitz. Well, they were not able to do that. So right now I think their personnel doesn't allow them to do that. With Bronson Kaufusi being iffy in terms of injury, Alani Fua now is tweaked. There's all kinds of reasons why now. I don't expect BYU just to be able to overpower one-on-one pass protection. So you'll have to see them get more risky, more aggressive in terms of blitzing in order to get that. Because what's been proven over the last couple of weeks is that if there's no pass rush, if there's no pressure on the quarterback, even a backup quarterback like Utah State trotted out there can torch BYU secondary deep. And that's something that they can't afford to happen.
Do you consider, if you're Nick Howell, maybe we move Bronson Kaufusi back to defensive end and put a different playmaker up there and try and generate something off the D-line just to mix it up? Or, hey, we're going to disguise our coverages and blitz more randomly? How do you get a pass rush?
Yeah, well, you have to bring extra people. And you have to throw in different kinds of stunts and things like that. But ultimately, right now, they're just not good enough. They're just not good enough. If Alani Fua and Bronson Kaufusi are both healthy, then there's all kinds of ways they can pressure the quarterback. And I would not drop Kaufusi to defensive end necessarily, just because when he's standing up, you can move him around to find matchups. Remember what Kyle Van Noy has done over the last several years. Sometimes he would rush off the edge. But other times he'd find a spot along that offensive line where there was a weak link in the pass protection. Let's say the left guard was the weak link.
Right.
Well, he'd end up rushing there. And I think they can do that. But without those 2 guys healthy at the same time, they've got a problem, and they've got to blitz. The problem with blitzing is now you hang out the secondary in more man coverage. So there will be a lot of risk coming up for BYU, and I think there'll be a lot of reward. They'll get the quarterbacks. But there'll be times when they'll get burned over the top as well. And that's the danger when you don't have your top 2 guys healthy at the same time that can get to the pass.
It's a Matich Monday on BYU Sports Nation with ESPN's Trevor Matich. Trevor, when you look at BYU and their core objectives, Bronco Mendenhall has labeled 3 every year that he's been the head coach: finish in the top 25, win 10 games, and win a bowl game. Those are still within reach. Does this team have what it takes, in your opinion, to reach all 3 of those objectives without Taysom Hill and with the struggling defense that they've had for the past few weeks?
Well, it's all relative, isn't it? We were talking before about the nature of the schedule. how it's not strong enough for them to go undefeated and get an automatic berth in the top 4, things like that. Well, now all of a sudden that works into BYU's favor, doesn't it? Because now to get into the New Year's Six Bowls would be difficult, very difficult. The top 4 is completely out of the question at this point. But to still win 10 games, they can still do it. Because Boise is not the Boise that they've been. They're still tough, but they're not up to the standard that they've been a few years ago. This will be a tough game at UCF. But if BYU can win one of those 2 games, then there's no reason to think they couldn't win 10 in the regular season. And that could add an 11th in a bowl game. So, yes, BYU is good enough to do that. But I think this game showed you one of the reasons why it's so difficult for anybody to go undefeated. Because you can't account for an opposing team playing lights out on a given game. When you lose your starting quarterback early in the game to injury, things like that happen to a lot of teams. Maybe not the starting quarterback, but other key players. You have, 5 of the top 8, 4 or 5 of the top 8 lost.
Nuts.
This weekend. It's crazy. So Alabama, who I thought was the best team in the country, lost. Texas A&M, who a lot of people have in their top 4 coming into this weekend, lost. It's crazy. Oregon lost to unranked Arizona.
Oklahoma
went out to TCU. Oklahoma, people have in their top 4, coming into this weekend. TCU ranked number 25. Oklahoma lost. It is so difficult for anybody to go undefeated. And I want to point this out because this is important. In 1984, we went undefeated, won the national championship. We had a lot of help from other teams. But I think the myth has grown over the years that we just blew everybody out. Well, guess what? We didn't. We had a couple of desperate comebacks. We had games that we should have lost, but the other team didn't make a play. I mean, we had miracles work on our favor, just like Auburn had a bunch of miracles work for their favor to get to the national championship game last year. It is really hard to go undefeated. You need a lot of luck. And it's the worst luck of all when you've got a Heisman candidate quarterback who has a season-ending injury early in a game when you're playing a rival who's playing at the top of their game. It's very difficult. So BYU, it feels terrible right now. But BYU can still reach all those goals that Bronco Mendenhall has that you mentioned, and this can still be a special season. But what they've got to do is have a great practice, and then another great practice, and then go win the next game.
Trevor, great to talk to you. Really intrigued to see what happens between BYU and UCF. The first college football game this week, Thursday night on ESPN. Can't wait to talk to you next week.
Thanks, guys.